You're listening to Surely a Mystery, straight from Long Beach Island, New Jersey. We're here to share with you all the spooky, scary, and mind-bending enigmas that make up the Jersey Shore. I'm your living host, Anna, here with some mystery, history, and a few tips to proper ghost hunting. So why don't we get started? Pre-prison systems have historically been punishments, which would include exile, corporal punishment, slavery, and of course public shaming, like putting people in the stocks and then letting people throw rotten food at them. But before 19th century, imprisonment was primarily used for temporary detention, like before trial or before other punishments were actually inflicted. It really was very rare for those long-term stays. Historically, imprisonment was primarily used for holding individuals. They were awaiting trial or those other forms of punishments, rather than the primary form of punishment being putting them in jail. Early prisons, like in Greece and Rome, were not isolated from other citizens, so there was a tendency for overcrowding and disease. Think, unfortunately, like Mexican prisons today, that have 200 prisoners in a prison designed to hold only 75. Prisons as we know them today are more of a place, depending on the country, where people spend long periods of time and are often in isolated corridors for more violent crimes. This shift towards imprisonment as the core method of punishment is a key part of the prison history in the United States. We shifted in the mid-1800s or so to this long-term stay style. We all think we understand what prisons are like from shows like Orange is the New Black, and of course what we hear from the nightly news with prison breaks and or complaints by prisoners of inhumane conditions. However, we need to go back in time to truly understand the prisons which are haunted that we're going to talk about today. Think no AC, no heating, forget 3 hots and a comfortable cot. Think maybe a meal which was usually cold and not very edible or nutritious. Sometimes you may not even get a meal for several days. Medicine was next to nothing. Remember, antibiotics weren't even invented until 1928. So infections were a certain death sentence. Smuggling things into prison was really easy those days compared to now. But there are no phones, clothes. You maybe had one set and not always for the right weather. If any of your possessions go missing, you're more than likely not to have a commissary where you can get new stuff. You'd have to get it from friends and family who would bring it. There was no bank system within the prison like there is today. Friends and family can't simply sell you money or goods so that you can barter for something new. Many prisoners escaped for the simple reason, surviving. A few didn't want to be hung, shot, or electrocuted, but in general, it was a really hard life. These prisoners have more rights and more comforts than some people on the outside. What keeps a decommissioned prison around these days can be historical groups or someone buying it and then using it for ghost hunting or ghostly events like Halloween mazes. Several of these prisons that we're going to talk about today are already demolished, but that doesn't mean the ghosts are gone. Remember, like in the asylum episode, same thing happens. The ground or the location is still infused with all the hate, disappointment, fear, disgust, and anxiety that was once contained by the real walls and real guards. There are 2 Essex County jails to talk about when it comes to haunted experiences. The first is Essex County Jail, which was built in 1837. Originally, the jail was part of the courthouse with a dark and really moist basement dungeon built around 1810. Grace Church, now where that dungeon once was. Remember, children could be incarcerated as young as 9, and until 1867, they were often kept together in the same cells with the adults. There was no juvie hall back then. It really wasn't until the first stock market crash of 1873 that there seemed to be in New Jersey a real surge in crime and in the jail numbers. And that's when they became so drastically increased, they really couldn't handle it with the jails they had. Some stats suggest that about 45% of prisoners were immigrants who had newly arrived and had no connections. Most arrests around 1880 or so were for assault, drunkenness, and or disorderly conduct. So in 1890, they added like a whole new wing to the Essex County Jail. And women didn't get their own jail until 1895. The last execution officially on the site was a hanging for Henry Schaub, who killed his wife and baby by slashing them to death. And yes, it took until 1909 for a hospital to even be built on the premises. Things only got worse when in 1918 we had Prohibition. And again in 1922, because blacks were escaping racial violence in the South, there was this great influx of blacks into Newark. And arrests for blacks nearly tripled overnight. Now, only a couple years later, in 1929, it was the Great Depression. But of course, the prison actually shined, but not for what you'd think. Although the prison was overcrowded with poor medical, it did have the prettiest flower gardens in all of Newark. No, I'm not kidding. The warden and his wife maintained a remarkable garden, which was prize-winning, on the grounds. But in 1971, it all came to a close when it literally closed down. The ghosts have had issues on the location since the Civil War. Many Confederate soldiers were kept there, and stories have told that some black prisoners died of fright because white ghosts scared them to death. And in later times, they walked the gangplanks at night, although everyone was supposed to be in bed in their cells. Ghostly figures, weird sounds, and heavy footsteps would scare prisoners in later times. If the guards didn't get you, the ghosts would, according to some old prisoners. You can take guided tours about the history of the jail, and sometimes they will offer ghost tours. Paranormally, ghost hunters and people investigating the area have captured strange photos and video footage of weird noises or shadowy figures. Most share stories about unseen hands touching you, especially if you're nice looking, whether you're a man or a woman. Others talk about cold spots. It was summer and I was giving a tour. We turned a corner and it went from hot and sweltering to Arctic cold in a second. I lost my train of thought for a second because it was so cold. But now that happens a lot, said one tour guide. A repairman had been asked to do some routine work at the place since they often rent it out for private parties and for photo shoots. I was just standing there trying to decide how to get started when I heard footsteps. But I was the only one in that part of the building. I called out, no reply. A few minutes later, I heard a clang of a door being closed and then like this weird cackle sound. I haven't gone back since. You never feel alone. Sometimes during photo shoots, when they take the test shots, there'll be weird orbs. Of course, the photographers think that they're just dust particles, but it happens to all of them, said one employee. In 1873, Essex County Jail Annex had been built because, believe it or not, the Newark jail had such overcrowding that was caused by Civil War criminals. That was almost 10 years after the war was over. In the one building, it had 2 wings, but it wasn't until 17 years later that it got a kitchen and a hospital wing. I'm kind of wondering where the food came from. Eventually, they added a powerhouse, because remember, no AC, no power, no electricity. And they got a subterranean tunnel system which connected everything together. Female convicts had to be added, so in about the late 1910s, they actually got their own building. Then more cells had to be built about the 1930s. Remember again, the Great Depression. Historical records confirm that, frankly, construction was nearly a yearly occurrence at this place. And that's a sad statement about crime in New Jersey. Finally, in 2005, when the new facility was completely built, whoever was left in the annex was automatically moved over to this new place. Then they tried to sell the old annex to whomever they could. They would try and sell the land, the buildings, the stuff that's inside the buildings. If and when they couldn't, then they had to get rid of things. Then they started to demolish the buildings one by one. The last building to go was the original historic brownstone jail building. The local government did try and save it as a house, then they tried as apartments, but everything seemed to fall through. The complaints were nearly the same. Cold spots everywhere were common, even though AC and other comforts had never been installed. Certain cells were always cold. Some prisoners even refused to be moved into certain cell numbers. They would talk about something in the middle of the night touching them. And several murders actually occurred because cellmates thought that their cellie had touched them inappropriately when they didn't want to be. Noises were common too. The clanking of cell doors when they were already closed. One former guard shared, "You would hear the sound of a cell opening, but they were all locked and closed. So you'd walk it and nothing. Then you'd hear it again, and sometimes the prisoners would laugh at you, saying they, meaning the ghosts, got you again." As they were demolishing the buildings, crews would continue to report cold spots, of course. But then they started seeing people in the windows or down the hallways, and they would hear them in the building, the ones that they were about to demolish. So it became a routine that they actually quit searching for anybody still left in the building before they exploded it or began to tear it down. They just hoped it wasn't some poor homeless person that was left there. You'd hear strange things like moans and groans. After you worked there a while, it was more annoying than actually creepy, said one old demolition guy. I got assigned to guard the place at night, and it was horrible. The weird noises, the sudden wind or chilly spots, and then, of course, all those like shadow people. You would check it out, and it was like a game. The ghosts would take you on a wild goose chase or even try to get you hurt. So I quit. It ain't worth it, said a former night guard. Now, why don't we switch gears for the second one, which is a prison museum. Yes, the Haunted Burlington County Museum in Mount Holly. The prison was actually built in 1811 and was one of Robert Mills' first designs. He actually stopped building prisons altogether and decided to make a switch to big government buildings, including national monuments. The prison itself was in constant use from 1911 to 1966. The Boston Strangler was incarcerated there and then released before he supposedly committed the crimes that made him notorious. Ellis H. Parker was also made famous by the prison, but in the opposite way. He was on the other side of the law. Some consider him to be New Jersey's own Sherlock Holmes of detectives. The great thing about this one is that it gets investigated all the time by amateur ghost hunters and even television ghost investigators. You're going to find tons of EVPs or disembodied voices or orb photos which have been collected at this location. If you want to try and get your own paranormal documentation at this place, you're free to call the Burlington County Parks Department at area code 609-265-5858. Now, some investigators talk about putting in fresh batteries and then having their equipment completely charged and they're ready to go, only to have them go completely dead and not work at all. They change out the batteries, and boom, the batteries are dead yet again. During the 1990s, it's said that workers heard sounds and say things throughout the building were just freaky. They would smell smoke cigars or cigarette smoke in certain cells. I went for a visit thinking nothing of this place, and I kept smelling cigarette smoke. Literally, like someone was blowing smoke at me every once in a while, straight in my face, said one visitor. We had a tri-field measurement system, that shows fluctuations in the EM field. It was dead for the longest time. And then I stood in front of this one cell and it went off the charts. Like the needle was buried and got stuck. I walked to the right and back down to normal, said a recent investigator. Yes, of course, you can even sometimes hear the sound of chains rattling. How, ghosty. What ghost story would you not want to have that in? Moaning and groaning, especially around Halloween time, when the veil between the worlds is the thinnest. Other times you're going to hear when there are few people late at night. It starts out as a low volume, and then once or twice it sounds in a near scream level. The artifacts that are located in the museum part of the location are equally as traumatic. There are even tickets to the execution of a convict who murdered his lover. Or maybe you'd like to see the drawings of the last 2 inmates to be executed at the prison. Try taking photographs of them and you might see a series of weird orbs or streaks in your photos, even if you have a digital camera. The last place I want to cover for this episode is the Passaic County Jail in Paterson, New Jersey. The place was known for its notoriously poor conditions and overcrowding. It was built in 1957 and was the subject of multiple class action lawsuits due to all these issues. The jail was demolished in December 2021 and it was replaced literally by an office space and a parking lot. Now, inmates there reported beatings, sweltering heat in the summer, extreme cold in the winter, inadequate food, and infestations of rodents and cockroaches. The jail was actually only designed for 230 inmates, but it often housed over 1,500. So the particular lawsuits in 1979 and 2008 cited that the jail's conditions were often, quote unquote, an affront to human decency. It took until October 2024 for it actually to finally be demolished to become a parking lot, and they're constructing some office buildings. While it has been demolished, it seemed to go well until the workers were actually inside alone. After stripping necessary or sellable things, they had to get rid of things that would make it harder for the building to collapse or to tear down. One former worker said it was just plain weird. You would hear things. Of course, you figure it's someone else in your crew. Then you get pushed, and if you ignored it, they'd push you harder. A supervisor also said, we would have guys quit all the time. I used to think it was the job, but then they would talk about hearing whispers in their ears, even though they had the big heavy-duty earplugs. So then they talk about being touched. Some locals would talk about seeing people in the windows or peeking behind the gates. They would call the cops, of course, but there was nothing. However, the local kids then tried to dare each other to break in, and just to say that they did it. It started out as a rite of passage for those who wanted to join certain groups. They were dared to face the ghostly prisoners of the past and see how tough they really were. One kid broke in and then realized that he actually couldn't find a way out. He used his cell phone to call his buddies, who of course made fun of him and told him to just go out the way he came in. The kid said that he literally couldn't find the way. An anonymous call suddenly happened to the cops to get their friend out. By the time the cops found him, he was literally balled up on the floor and shaking. He was nearly frozen completely, even though it was summer. Some say that soon after, his family moved away. Many talk about the ghost lights. There was no power on the property during the 2000s. It had been shut off to save money and get ready for demolition. But there were still reports of lights in windows and what looked like flashlights or flashlight-looking orbs which seemed to float by the windows or the gate. There was even a ghostly figure of a man who looked like he was smoking just inside the gate, only to disappear into thin air once you got close enough to see who or what it was. We'd walk by and it was just weird. You would smell cigarette smoke, but there wasn't anybody there. We used to think it kind of floated over from the nearby businesses because there's a smoke shop nearby. But then we'd walk by really late at night when everything was closed. And the smell was strong. So we never walked late at night again, said one young woman. There are barber shops and, like she said, a smoke shop near the site today. Some locals will talk about shadowy figures that'll pass by their businesses, but there's no real substance to them. Many of the Latino businesses have taken some paranormal protective measures because of the strange things that have happened along County Road 509. People thought the demolition would be a good thing, but now the ghosts are free. And any piece of metal or artifacts that might be taken from the former prison have now become great ghostly hiding places. One last place that I kind of should mention, it has a fitting name, the Ye Old Pemberton Lockup. Now, according to the Pemberton Historical Society, it was a one-room lockup which took in prisoners around 1876. It's literally located on the corner of St. John Street and U Street. It's a brick building all by itself. Locals think it's a complete joke until you hear noises late at night coming from inside the building. Weird scratching noises at the door, like someone trying to get out. Kids will speed by on their bikes, but many locals have at least heard a story or two about it. You can drive by and actually take a look at it. It's there, and it's real, and it's historic. It's up to you whether or not you believe that it was once a one-room jail cell. I'm not sure, but it could be. Almost kind of like a town drunk tank, since there wasn't a lot of crime back then, and it was a small enough town that maybe there weren't a lot of drunks who needed someplace to sober up. Prisons or old-time jail cells are all around us. It's hard to find them. Quakers really influenced those in South Jersey by pushing workhouses rather than real long-term punishment and confinement places, unless they really did something bad. So you honestly don't find a lot of old prisons in South Jersey. Many jails were located near the local courthouse, even in the local courthouse, or the local sheriff's residence. The problem is that towns were small, or the center of town really wasn't the place where people wanted all those ill repute to be housed. Many haunted prison areas are charged with the desire for escape, but more so, it's also for a desire for some kind of revenge or wreaking havoc with the locals. Think of it this way. You put me in here, now I'm dead, so what's or who's going to stop me from committing the perfect crimes? I can't touch you? Watch me. I can't push you? Watch me. I can't trespass where I want? Well, I'm not sure how far from the location of the prison that a spirit could go, but at least they're not always confined to the walls of their cells. And the worst of all, spirits can actually attach themselves to unsuspecting people. So let's do a quick word before we go. Why or how can spirits attach to you? Well, first of all, there's just sheer emotional and energetic resonance. Spirits, like people, are believed to have different vibrational frequencies. So if a person's energy aligns with a spirit's, it can create a connection and the potential for an attachment. Similarly, shared emotions and experiences between the ghost and the person who's investigating the site. There's a tense emotions, both positive and negative, can create strong energetic bonds. Spirits may be drawn to individuals experiencing similar emotions or who have been through similar traumatic events. Think you had a relative murdered and you saw it, and that particular ghost had the same thing happen to them. They might hook onto you. The next are the traumatic and the vulnerable. You kind of have a crack in your energy field. So during traumatic events, before you go investigate, some believe that you might lose a fragment of your soul. You need it replaced, so the spirit's ready to replace it for you. If you enter a place and you aren't totally feeling yourself, or you're super tired, sick, or just emotionally burdened, there's literally a crack in your energy armor. Traumatic experiences can create cracks or split in the person's energy field, making them more vulnerable to spirit attachment. The worst case scenario is if there's a loss of soul fragment. During traumatic events, some people believe that you actually might lose fragments of your soul, which the spirit then replaces. If you recently lost a loved one or a child, then some people say that a piece of your soul left with them, and you're now looking to repair yourself. So why not get a fresh piece from a ghostly soul? Other ways might be obvious to some, like intentional invitation. Yeah, sometimes individuals might intentionally invite spirits through rituals, practices, or even negative thought patterns, or even ancestral ties. Yep, that's right. Spirits from one's family tree or cultural background may attempt to connect with you. So, for example, I've been doing my genealogy and I found some really cool historic people in my lines. However, I'm not sure that I would really want to visit the castles where these people were because they weren't really the nicest people. Now, lastly, of course, there are unresolved issues. That's kind of obvious. Some spirits of the deceased may linger due to unresolved issues. So they're seeking some type of closure in our realm or connection to what they might think are their loved ones. So you act as their surrogate loved one. If they couldn't make it to the church on time, and you might be like the girl that they were going to marry, they're going to follow you home to literally get married to you. It might happen in your dreams, or there might be strange occurrences. Edgar Cayce, a famous psychic, talked about how dead relatives would literally navigate the living to a better life or events by psychically pushing you from beyond the grave. It's like coincidences in your life that you can't explain that put you in the right place at the right time to have something good happen. There are some ways, like laying on of hands by someone else, or of course more intimate things, like don't consummate a relationship in a really haunted place for your first time because you may come home with 2 girlfriends or 2 boyfriends instead of just the one. That's just a cautionary tale. There are many other places we can talk about, and if you think of any that you want me to investigate, research, and then share, please, suggestions are always welcome. This has been a quick historical paranormal lesson in the realm of New Jersey haunted prisons. Remember to leave a review, and of course, 5 stars would be awesome. But for now, this has been Anna, your living host. As always, bringing you the histories and mysteries, no matter how disturbing or hair-raising, from Long Beach Island, New Jersey. Hopefully, you'll tune in for our next lesson in the paranormal parts of New Jersey life. Until then, stay whole, sane and healthy. And remember to take care of yourself before you have to put that oxygen mask on someone else.